Look closely at the person sitting next to you. Look at their posture, the microtensions around their eyes, the exact rate of their breathing. Now look at yourself. Every single behavioral baseline you possess, the way you cross your arms when threatened, the pitch of your voice when you lie, the precise level of comfort you feel in a room full of strangers is an anchor. It's a beautifully constructed, incredibly complex survival matrix designed by your subconscious to do one thing: keep you predictable. Because to the primitive, survival-driven layers of your brain, predictability equals safety. But what happens when the matrix begins to fracture? Right now, a silent, unseen neurological war is being waged inside millions of people. It's a phenomenon behavioral profiles call identity decoupling. You don't realize it's happening until you suddenly look at your life, your career, your relationships, the daily habits you've repeated for a decade, and feel a cold, hollow sense of complete detachment. It's a feeling of being a ghost inside your own skin. You find yourself wondering, who wrote this script I'm reciting? When an old identity starts dying, your brain enters a state of high alert crisis management. It feels like depression. It looks like anxiety. It presents as an existential emergency. But under behavioral analysis, it is something entirely different. It is your evolutionary software trying to force a hard reboot. The primary reason 95% of people fail to transition into their highest potential isn't a lack of willpower. It's that they completely misread the psychological triage signals of a dying ego. They mistake the birth pangs of their new self for the destruction of their sanity, panic, and retreat right back into the cages of their old baselines. If you don't understand the invisible shifts happening inside your behavioral architecture during this transition, you are completely defenseless against your own subconscious defense mechanisms. Your brain will actively sabotage your growth to save the version of you it already knows how to protect. To break the loop, you must learn to read the hidden behavioral cues of identity death. Recognize the exact moment your old self is attempting to drag you back down, and weaponize the friction to completely rewrite your psychological blueprint. If you have noticed a sudden, quiet shift in how you process the world around you, if the conversations you used to love now feel entirely hollow, if the goals you chased for years suddenly feel like a stranger's homework, and if you feel a strange, cold detachment growing right in the center of your chest, I need you to look at me very closely. You are not losing your mind. You are experiencing the highly systematic, deeply uncomfortable death of your old identity. Most people look at this exact phase of life and call it a crisis. They run to therapists, they self-medicate, or they panic because the person they used to be is slipping through their fingers. But if you analyze the behavioral data, this isn't a tragedy. It's a critical structural transition. And the next few minutes are the most important minutes of your life. If you do not understand the invisible psychological physics of what is happening inside you right now, your subconscious mind will view this transition as a lethal threat. It will weaponize your deepest insecurities, trigger severe phantom anxieties, and trick you into running right back to the miserable, familiar version of yourself just because it's safe. I am going to show you exactly how to read the behavioral signals of this death, how to survive the terrifying middle zone where you feel like a nobody, and exactly how to consciously program the person you are about to become. If you stay to the end, you will see the exact blueprint to stop sabotaging your own evolution. When an identity begins to crack, the first thing that changes isn't your thoughts. It's your baseline situational awareness. You start noticing the scripts. You sit at dinner with friends you've known for 5 years, and suddenly you can hear the rehearsed nature of the dialogue. You see the subtle power plays, the micro-expressions of validation seeking, the exhausting social compliance, and for the first time, you don't want to play. You feel like an observer in your own life. This is the brain's decoupling phase. The neural networks that used to fire automatically when you played your old role are losing their fuel. Your ego is starving, and because it is starving, it is panicking. The danger zone hits when you enter what behaviorists call the vacuum. The old you is dead, but the new you is just a silhouette. You have no baselines here. You don't know how this new version of you reacts to criticism. You don't know how it handles wealth. You don't know how it navigates intimacy. And when the human brain is placed in a high uncertainty environment without an established behavioral script, it defaults to fear. It starts screaming at you to go back. It makes you feel incredibly lonely. It triggers a profound sense of grief, mourning a person who is still technically alive. This is exactly where 95% of the population breaks. They mistake this emptiness for depression. They think, I was happier before, forgetting that they were actually just comfortably numb. To survive this, you must treat your old identity exactly like a target profile you are analyzing from the outside. When a wave of anxiety hits, you don't own it. You sit back, observe the heart rate spike, look at the tension in your jaw, and you say, ah, there's the ghost of the old baseline trying to claw its way back in. You don't fight it, you profile it. The final step is conscious architecture. You cannot leave your next identity to chance, or your environment will choose it for you. You must deliberately select the new behavioral baselines. How does the next version of you walk into a room? What is the precise vocal cadence? How much eye contact do they hold before breaking away? You start practicing these micro behaviors long before you feel like them. You become an operative infiltrating your own future. The death of an identity is an agonizing process, but it is the only path to genuine sovereignty. Stop trying to revive a corpse. Let the old version of you burn, stand quietly in the ashes, and prepare to build the person you were actually engineered to be. The behavioral baseline fracture is the first covert indicator that your psychological tectonic plates are shifting. In profiling and behavioral analysis, we look at baselines, the predictable, deeply grooved patterns of speech, body language, emotional triggers, and social interactions that define a person's everyday state. For decades, your brain has relied on these baselines to navigate the world with the least amount of caloric expenditure possible. It knows exactly how much tension to hold in your shoulders when a superior speaks to you, the precise micro-expression of compliance to flash to keep the peace in an unhealthy relationship, and the automatic defensive script to run whenever your core vulnerabilities are threatened. This matrix of habits creates a highly predictable behavioral signature. But when your old identity begins to die, this signature experiences a catastrophic structural failure. The automated systems that used to run your life seamlessly begin to glitch, and it manifests first as a profound, unshakable sense of sensory and psychological detachment. Suddenly, you find yourself sitting in the middle of your life, looking at everything through a thick pane of glass. You are physically present, but cognitively decoupled. When you engage in the social rituals that used to comfort you, you are no longer a participant. You have been involuntarily upgraded to an analyst. You watch the people around you trading gossip or seeking validation, and instead of joining in, you are tracking the mechanics of the room. You see the micro behaviors of insecurity, the subtle shifts in vocal pitch, the desperate bids for attention, and you realize with a jolt of cold clarity that you are watching a script you no longer want to read. The automatic compliance patterns that used to dictate your behavior simply refuse to fire. If someone insults you or attempts to manipulate you using an old trigger, the expected emotional spike doesn't happen. Instead, there is a hollow, quiet space where your reaction used to live. You are witnessing the breakdown of long-standing social compliance, a sign that the neural pathways keeping you tethered to your past self are losing their electrical charge. This fracture creates a terrifying internal phenomenon, the inability to run your old cognitive scripts. You might find yourself mid-sentence in a familiar argument or a standard workplace conversation, only to completely lose the desire to finish the thought. The words feel heavy, artificial, and entirely foreign in your mouth. Your brain is actively refusing to invest energy into maintaining a persona that no longer serves your evolutionary trajectory. This is why the fracture is so often misdiagnosed as an emotional crisis or a sudden depressive episode. The profound lethargy you feel when forced to play your old role isn't clinical depression. It is tactical non-cooperation from your subconscious mind. Your internal systems are redirecting every ounce of psychological fuel away from the dying ego architecture to prepare for a total system reboot. When you understand this from a behavioral standpoint, you stop panicking about the empty space. You realize that the sudden silence in your head, the drop in social tolerance, and the breaking of your old behavioral baselines are the necessary clearing of the psychological canvas, signaling that the grip of the old identity has permanently fractured. The subconscious trap of predictability is the primary reason most human beings remain shackled to a life of quiet desperation. To understand why your brain actively sabotages your evolution, you must look at the human machine through the lens of pure survival design. Your brain is not an engine designed to make you happy, fulfilled, or self-actualized. It is a hyper-efficient survival organ designed to keep you alive until tomorrow using the absolute minimum amount of metabolic energy. In the currency of your primitive neural architecture, unfamiliarity is the most expensive and dangerous commodity on Earth. An unfamiliar situation requires intense conscious processing, heightened sensory scanning, and massive caloric expenditure. A familiar situation, no, even a miserable one, can be entirely automated. Therefore, your subconscious mind operates on a brutal, hidden equation. A highly predictable, toxic environment is always mathematically superior to an unpredictable, prosperous one. The brain already knows how to survive the poison it is used to, but it has no data on the paradise it hasn't seen yet. When you attempt to break your old identity, you are not just changing your mind, you are launching a direct assault on this evolutionary survival mechanism. The moment you step outside the boundaries of your established behavioral baselines, your brain's internal radar treats that deviation exactly like a physical threat. It doesn't matter if you are trying to leave a dead-end job, end a parasitic relationship, or step into a position of high-status leadership. To the deeper, reactive structures of your mind, you are stepping out of the safety of the cave and into open territory. To halt your progress, the subconscious deploys its most effective tactical barrier: acute, unfocused anxiety. This isn't a rational fear based on tangible data. It is an engineered phantom panic. It manifests as a sudden, overwhelming sense of impending doom, a tightness in your chest, or a swarm of intrusive thoughts warning you that everything is about to fall apart. This anxiety is completely manufactured by your ego to function as an invisible electric fence. The moment you approach the perimeter of your new identity, the fence shocks you, hoping the discomfort will force you to retreat to the familiar cage of your old habits. Most people completely misread this psychological counterattack. They experience the sudden wall of anxiety and think, this internal resistance means I am doing something wrong. In reality, under behavioral profiling, that resistance means you are doing something entirely right. You have successfully found the boundary lines of your old programming. If you do not understand this trap, you will inevitably succumb to the craving for comfort. The brain will trick you into feeling a bizarre, nostalgic longing for the very things that used to destroy you. You will find yourself missing the chaotic relationships, the unfulfilling routines, and the low-status behaviors, because in those environments, your brain knew exactly who it was. The misery was predictable, And predictability brought a sick sense of psychological safety. To beat the trap, you must learn to recognize this manufactured anxiety not as a red light telling you to stop, but as a green light confirming you are actively tearing down the old blueprint. You have to willingly endure the fiction of being unpredictable to your own mind, refusing to let the subconscious bait you into returning to a lesser version of yourself just because it is easier to calculate. Decoupling the ego matrix requires you to master the art of psychological displacement, moving from the chaotic position of the actor on the stage to the cold, objective seat of the analyst in the audience. Most people spend their entire lives completely fused with their personalities. They believe that their knee-jerk reactions, their deep-seated insecurities, their flashes of anger, and their desperate needs for validation are who they actually are. In the realm of elite behavioral profiling, we view this fusion as a state of total vulnerability. When you are identical with your programming, you are entirely predictable, easily manipulated, and completely incapable of conscious evolution. The ego matrix is nothing more than a highly coordinated network of conditioned reflexes, historical defense mechanisms, and environmental coping strategies that you have practiced so many times they have frozen into an illusion of permanent character. To kill the old identity and allow the new one to form, you must systematically drive a wedge between your core, conscious awareness, and this automated psychological machinery. This process begins the moment you stop treating your internal states as personal definitions and start treating them purely as historical data. When a wave of intense insecurity hits you, or when an old urge to seek approval arises, the untrained mind immediately internalizes it, thinking, "I am insecure," or "I am weak." The moment you make that linguistic and cognitive leap, you have reinforced the matrix. To decouple, you must aggressively shift your internal dialogue into the third person. You observe the sensation rising in your physiology, the tightening of the throat, the heat in the chest, the frantic pacing of the mind, and you profile it as if it belongs to a stranger sitting across an interrogation table from you. You tell yourself, the asset is currently experiencing a standard rejection avoidance loop based on childhood conditioning. By altering the syntax of your internal awareness, you immediately strip the emotion of its authority over your behavior. You realize that the feeling is not an absolute truth about who you are. It is merely an outdated line of code firing in a legacy software system that you are actively preparing to delete. Once you achieve this state of operational detachment, you can begin the critical work of isolating your core awareness from your conditioned reactions. You stop trying to fight, suppress, or argue with your old identity, because fighting an old habit only feeds it with attention and neural energy. Instead, you allow the old personality traits to run their course in your body, while you remain entirely unmoved as the observer. If the old identity wants to panic because you are not people-pleasing, you let the body feel the panic while you quietly maintain your boundaries. You treat your dying ego exactly like a legacy computer system that is throwing error codes during a hard drive wipe. You don't panic when the screen flashes warning signs. You expect them because you understand the mechanics of the deletion process. This systematic isolation effectively starves the old matrix of its power. When your conditioned reactions can no longer dictate your physical actions, the neural pathways that support them begin to atrophy from lack of use. You effectively break the circuit, stepping out of the automated loop of your past and establishing a clean, quiet, psychological workspace from which your true, conscious sovereignty can finally be engineered. Navigating the grave zone friction means surviving the most volatile, psychologically dangerous phase of human transformation. In behavioral science, this is the dead space, the liminal vacuum where your old identity has been successfully dismantled and no longer functions, but your new neural baselines have not yet been established. You have effectively cut the ropes of the dock, but you cannot yet see the opposite shoreline. Most personal development literature deceptively paints growth as a smooth, linear ascent, but anyone who has actually re-engineered their psychology knows the truth. The middle phase feels like an absolute void. You are stripped of your old defense mechanisms, your old social circles no longer fit, and the toxic habits that used to give you a cheap hit of dopamine now offer nothing but disgust. Yet you do not yet feel strong, confident, or fully aligned with the person you are becoming. You are a ghost, suspended between two worlds, and it is in this precise friction that the vast majority of people permanently break and retreat to their past. The primary characteristic of the grave zone is a profound, disorienting absence of feedback. For your entire life, your old identity gave you consistent feedback loops. If you were a people pleaser, you knew exactly how to elicit a smile to feel safe. If you operated from a baseline of chaos and trauma, you knew exactly how to trigger a crisis to feel stimulated. But in the vacuum, when you deliberately stop running those old programs, the silence is deafening. The brain, which craves data above all else, begins to panic because it can no longer calculate its position on the map. This manifests as a terrifying existential blankness. You look in the mirror and literally do not recognize the eyes looking back at you. Your old friends look at you with confusion because you are no longer playing your assigned role in their social dynamic. And because you haven't yet mastered the presence of your future self, you feel awkward, exposed, and entirely naked. It is an intense psychological friction where every primitive layer of your brain is screaming that you have made a lethal mistake. To survive this phase, you must fundamentally reframe what this friction actually represents under behavioral analysis. The awkwardness, the isolation, and the deep internal emptiness are not signs of failure. They are the literal physiological metrics of neural pruning. When an old identity dies, the complex dendritic trees in your brain that supported those behaviors must physically wither away before new pathways can be insulated with myelin. The emptiness you feel is the clean space left behind after a demolition. If you try to force yourself to feel certain, happy, or accomplished during this phase, you will trigger an internal rejection response because those feelings are unearned by your current neurobiology. The operational strategy in the grave zone is simple. You must learn to sit completely still inside the nothingness. You must become comfortable being a nobody. When the phantom urge to run back to an old toxic dynamic arises just to feel something, you recognize it as a withdrawal symptom of the dying ego. You look at the discomfort, you profile the craving for what it is, and you choose to remain anchorless, knowing that the ability to tolerate the vacuum without panicking is the ultimate test of psychological sovereignty. Architecting the new blueprint requires you to abandon the passive hope of self-discovery and adopt the aggressive, calculated mindset of a behavioral engineer. You do not find your new identity, you install it, piece by piece, with the same cold precision you would use to program a computer or brief an operative for a deep cover mission. Once the old baselines have fractured, and you have endured the silent friction of the vacuum, you are left with a clean psychological canvas. But if you leave this canvas blank, your environment, your old triggers, and the people around you will inevitably force you back into your historical patterns. To prevent this regression, you must deliberately design and execute the micro-behaviors of the person you intend to become long before you actually feel like that person. True behavioral transformation is entirely top-down. You must act your way into a new way of thinking, rather than trying to think your way into a new way of acting. This engineering process begins with the hyper-specific definition of your new operational baselines. You cannot think in vague, abstract terms like, I want to be confident or I want to be powerful. A behavioral profiler cannot measure or execute a concept like confidence. Instead, you must break that identity down into its fundamental kinetic and linguistic components. You must ask yourself, what is the precise physical posture of this new version of me when walking into a high-stakes meeting? What is the exact rate of speech and vocal cadence when answering an aggressive question? How many seconds of direct, unbroken eye contact does this person maintain before choosing to break away? You must map out the exact micro-behaviors, the boundary lines, and the non-negotiable rules of this future self. You write this blueprint down not as a list of wishes, but as an operational directive, a tactical profile that you are commissioned to inhabit. Once the blueprint is drawn, you must weaponize deliberate non-compliance against your old habits to insulate the new neural pathways. Every single day, your environment will present you with triggers designed to evoke the ghost of your old identity. A colleague will speak to you condescendingly. A family member will try to guilt-trip you. Or a sudden setback will tempt you to default to your old coping mechanisms of distraction or panic. Every one of these moments is a critical interception point. Instead of reacting automatically, you pause, access the new blueprint, and execute a response that is completely non-compliant with your past. If the old you would have instantly smiled to smooth things over, the new you remains entirely expressionless and holds the silence. If the old you would have scrambled to explain yourself, the new you delivers a short, declarative statement and lets the other person sit in the discomfort. By consciously forcing these new physical and verbal reactions into your environment,